Hello everyone, you're welcome to the class. This is a continuation of our last lecture that we had before. I shall be uploading my lecture videos because it's almost impossible to get everybody together for us to be online and have the lecture at the same time. So I shall be uploading my lecture videos so you can check on it and then watch the lecture. My name is Dr. Kevin and I'm the instructor for field 1301-5031, Introduction to Philosophy. We are continuing our lecture today with the topic, what is philosophy? The word philosophy as an academic enterprise was first coined by an ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician called Pythagoras around 6th century BCE. Broadly speaking, philosophy is both an academic discipline and a way of life. As a methodic scientific discipline, philosophy is traceable to a time of beginning, and it was within this time and space that Pythagoras coined the word philosophy. It is in this mode that philosophy is a field of study out of which several other fields evolved, such as medicine, physics, biology, political science, etc. But as a way of life, philosophy is as old as mankind. Philosophy as a way of life was existing in different parts of the world as long as humans were existing there. It is a method which is a philosophical process of world views by different peoples in different parts of the world. Philosophy in this mode, it's a rigorous reasoning and an approach to finding answers to the fundamental questions about reality, morality, and knowledge. So, no specific place or particular place in human history holds an absolute claim to the origin of philosophy as a way of life. But as an academic and systematic enterprise, philosophy as a systematic enterprise is traced to Greece. It began with wonder. Humans began to wonder about the order in nature, about the differences in time and seasons, about the experiences, both physical and spiritual, The question becomes, what is wonder? Wonder is a feeling of surprise, mingled with admiration, caused by something beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, and inexplicable. It is also a feeling of doubt. And so, the wonder of the order in nature, the seasons of things in the world, the seasons of time, the problems of human existence, such as death, diseases, natural disasters, and the possible force behind it, and is responsible for them all, is how philosophy as a systematic and scientific study was born. Philosophical wonder is also a state of mind, cited and excited as well by the perception of novelty and of something strange or not well understood. Both Plato and Aristotle speak of wonder as the point of origin for philosophy. In Plato's book called Theaetetus, which probably dates from about 369 BC and is arguable Plato's greatest work on epistemology. In this book called Theaetetus, Socrates is recorded in this book as saying that wonder is the feeling of a philosopher, and philosophy begins in wonder. Also in Plato's book, The Republic, written about 375 BC, Plato tells us that there is no other beginning of philosophy than this wonder. Again, we see Aristotle in his book, The Metaphysics, originally published around 1831, 1831, and 1870, 1870. In this book, Aristotle writes, "It is through wonder that humans now begin and originally began to philosophize. This wonder led to questions like, what are things really made of? And what are they like? How do we explain one and many? How do we explain the changes in things? Why does a thing happen the way it does? What prompted these questions was the gradual realization that things are not exactly what they seem to be. That appearance differs from reality, such as issues like birth, death, growth, decay, etc. Questions about how things and humans come into existence things become different at different times and moments. How things pass out of existence. And then the cycle starts all over again. The approach to the questions about appearance and reality was different from that of the early Greek poets. This approach was an independent individual use of critical human reasoning to find answers to the fundamental questions about nature. So what this means is that when you start to wonder about things that happen to you, and when you start to wonder about things in the universe, and why things are the way they are, you are simply philosophizing. You have become a philosopher. Philosophy as a rigorous search for answers to all things began at the seaport town of Miletus, located across the Aegean Sea from Athens to the western shores of Asia Minor. In the last lecture, we tried to explain why Miletus was a catching point for philosophers. And the reason has remained that Miletus was a place of trade and commerce. And there was an exchange of cosmopolitan ideas. So merchants gathered at Miletus, and after doing their businesses, and because of the wealth in that city and the leisure in that city, they had the opportunity to get together and begin to wonder why things are the way they are. And as they gathered to wonder, they were philosophizing. And then philosophy, in a systematic form, began in Miletus. Ancient Greek philosophy is traceable to Homer, a poet, and Hesiod, a poet, around the 8th century BC. Homer wrote two great poems. The Iliad and the Odyssey, while Hesiod wrote his poem, which he called Theogony. Greeks in the late 5th and early 4th centuries BC considered their oldest poets to be Orpheus, Musaeus, Hesiod, and Homer, in that order. However, early Greek writers began to consider Homer earlier than Hesiod. These poets related human experiences and the nature of things in the world to the Greek gods. Their stories were not consistent, nor did they appeal to common sense and to logic. And so they were described as myths and superstitions. Philosophy is derived from two Greek words, philos, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. And so philosophy can be literally defined as the love of wisdom. A philosopher is a lover of wisdom. Love can be defined as warmth, attachment, enthusiasm, or devotion. Wisdom, on the other hand, can be defined as the ability to contemplate and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. However, we must make a distinction between wisdom and knowledge here. The primary difference between the two words is that wisdom involves a healthy dose of perspective and the ability to make sound judgments about a thing or a subject. Knowledge, on the other hand, is simply to know. Simply to know. Anyone can become knowledgeable about a subject by reading, researching, memorizing. Knowledge is the information we have learned, while wisdom is the ability to use that knowledge in a profound way. So knowledge is a part, and wisdom is the whole. Wisdom goes beyond learning facts. It includes making sense of those facts. Knowledge is acquired or earned, but wisdom is endowed as a gift from the divine, the supernatural, the infinite, from Mother Nature. It is not acquired nor earned. Therefore, the love of wisdom in philosophy is an enthusiastic attachment of devotion to deep contemplation on the fundamental cause and nature of all things, both seen and unseen. Different people have different definitions of philosophy. And it is, of course, according to their perspectives of life. For our friend Plato, a philosopher is one whose heart is fixed on reality. For Aristotle, he defines philosophy as the truth, which is gotten from the knowledge of the truth. Simply put, Aristotle defines philosophy as the knowledge of the truth. For Epicurus, philosophy is defined as an activity which secures the happy life by means of discussion and arguments. We see our friend William James defining philosophy as man thinking about generalities rather than particulars. William James is saying Philosophy is when humans think about general things rather than particular things. John Dewey describes philosophy as thinking which has become conscious of itself. For Ludwig Wittgenstein, the aim of philosophy is the logical clarification of thoughts. So for Wittgenstein, philosophy simply means the clarification, logical clarification of thoughts. For Martin Heidegger, he tells us that philosophy is the correspondence to the being of being. So when he says being of being, Heidegger is saying philosophy is corresponding to that which makes us human, the substance upon which we have become and upon which we are beings. We are human beings. So it is a correspondence to the being of being. For Jacques Maritain, philosophy is the science which by the natural light of reason studies the first causes or highest principles of all things. For Alfred Ayer, philosophizing is an activity of analysis. Our friend Bertrand Russell says that philosophy is merely the attempt to answer such ultimate questions, not careless or dogmatically as we do in ordinary life and even in the sciences, but critically after exploring all that makes such questions puzzling and after realizing all the vagueness and confusion that underlie our ordinary ideas. Generally, philosophy is a rational search for answers to the basic questions about the ultimate meaning of reality as a whole and of human life in particular. It is a search, a continuous search for meaning, for intelligibility, and for answers. It is a search that never ends. For by its very nature, philosophy is always on the way and never arrives its destination. No answer puts an end to a philosophical inquiry, since every answer turns out to be a new question. Dear friends, philosophy has 4 distinctive periods of its development. These periods are, number 1, the ancient period. Number 2, the medieval period. At the end of the medieval period, towards the beginning of the next period, there was a period called the Renaissance. So in the medieval period, we have the Renaissance period, which collapses, which ends up into the next period, the 3rd period, which is the modern period. And the modern period is the number 3 distinctive period in the philosophic development. The fourth period is the contemporary period. So we have four basic distinctive periods: the ancient period, the medieval period, the modern period, and the contemporary period. Now remember, between the end of medieval period and the beginning of modern period was the Renaissance period. And we shall look into these periods one after the other. The ancient period of philosophy. This era was punctuated with mythology and superstition. It was a period in which philosophy was trying to find answers to the problem of one and many, appearance and reality, morality, knowledge, and even what constitutes the fundamental stuff in physical objects in the world. This was what ancient period was concerned with. This was the problem they were looking into to find answers for. The problems of one and many, the problem of appearance and reality, the problem of morality, the problem of knowledge, and even the problem of what constitutes the fundamental substance in physical objects in the world that we see. This ancient period is traceable to around 585 BC. 585 BC. Some Greek philosophers in this era include: number one, Thales. Thales existed between 625 and 547 BC in Miletus. For Thales, in his effort to solve the problem of philosophy in the ancient period of philosophy, Thales postulated that the basic stuff of all things is water. Water is the reason upon which every other thing is. For Thales, it is water. After Thales, the next philosopher that came on board was Anaximander. Anaximander existed around 612 BC in Miletus, 612 BC in Miletus. Anaximander was a younger fellow citizen of Miletus, and he was also a pupil of Thales. In response to Thales, Anaximander says the basic stuff, the basic substance upon which all things are formed or stand or are made, the basic stuff of all things is the infinite, the boundless. So now we find Anaximander making a great shift from Thales. Because Thales equated the basic stuff of all things to water. And water is what we can see. And of course we can touch. It's a knowledge we can get from sense perception. the sense of sight, and the sense of touch. Anaximander made a huge move to describe the basic substance of all things as the infinite or boundless. This is something we can't see. We cannot see the infinite. Neither can we see the boundless. We can't touch it. So Anaximander moved into a rational realm to describe and to explain the basic stuff of all things. After Anaximander, there is this philosopher that also came, and his name is Anaximenes. Anaximenes, who existed between 585 and 528 BC, 585 and 528 BC in Miletus, was a younger associate of Anaximander. The names sound a little bit alike, but the first was Thales, and after Thales, the next is Anaximander, and after Anaximander, the next one is Anaximenes. So Anaximander and Anaximenes, they sound almost alike, but they are not the same. Anaximenes was a younger associate of Anaximander, and Anaximander was a pupil of Thales. In Anaximenes' response to Anaximander, he says that the basic stuff of all things is air, the air we breathe. The air we breathe. For Anaximenes, the basic substance upon which all other things are made is air, the air that we humans breathe and animals breathe. We find also Xenophanus. Xenophanus existed between 560 to 478 BC. Xenophanus' approach was completely different from that of Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. For Xenophanus, his approach was to criticize the traditional conception of the Greek gods by Homer the poet and Hesiod the poet. So Xenophanus was not happy for the way Homer and Hesiod pictured the Greek gods. For him, for Xenophanus, these two poets, Homer and Hesiod, pictured the Greek gods as not being worthy of our admiration or even reverence. He argued that Homer and Hesiod attributed qualities of reproach to the gods. And these qualities are qualities such as stealing, adultery, and mutual deception. So Xenophanus says Homer and Hesiod described the ancient Greek gods in the light of stealing, committing adultery, and exhibiting mutual deception. And he didn't like that. And so his philosophy was an attack on these two ancient Greek poets. He was not so much concerned in the same way Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes were in looking for the basic substance of all things. His concern was more on the way the Greek gods were pictured. And they were pictured in a way that they do not deserve any reverence from us as humans. And he did not like that. And so he criticized the works of Homer and Hesiod. There are many other philosophers of this ancient period, such as Heraclitus, Pythagoras, Parmenides, Zeno, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, Leucippus, Democritus, Protagoras, Gorgias, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, and etc. After the ancient period of philosophy, philosophy developed into another period called the medieval period. This era experienced the merging of philosophy and theology. It experienced the merging of reason and faith in seeking the primary stuff of all things. Philosophers in this era were arguing that the primary stuff, the primary thing responsible for reality, the primary thing responsible for morality, the primary thing responsible for knowledge and order in the universe is God. The God that the medieval philosophers talked about is different from the God of the ancient Greek poets of Homer and Hesiod. This God that the medieval philosophers talk about is a God of immense benevolence and all-knowing. Some philosophers in this period argue that the God that is being spoken about is the Christian God. Philosophers in this era included Augustine, Boëtius, Pseudo-Dionysius, John Scotus, Erigena, Anselm, Avicenna, Averroes, Maimonides, Thomas Aquinas, etc. The Renaissance period in the medieval era of philosophy covers very roughly the 15th and 16th centuries. It can be seen as a bridge between medieval philosophy and the start of modern philosophy during the Age of Reason. The Renaissance period is named for the rebirth or revival of classical civilization and learning. In general terms, it is usually considered to have begun in the mid-14th century and rolled across Europe over the succeeding 2 centuries. In philosophical terms, the Renaissance represents a movement away from Christianity and medieval scholasticism and towards humanism. with an increasing focus on the temporal and personal, over merely seeing this world as a gateway to the Christian afterlife. A new sense of critical inquiry arose that looked back to the ancient Greeks, but also set the stage for the birth of modern philosophy in the age of reason. Characteristics of the Renaissance period include a renewed interest in classical antiquity. A renewed interest in classical antiquity. A rise in humanistic philosophy, which is a belief in self, in human worth, and individual dignity. That is what humanistic philosophy simply entails. A belief in self, human worth, and individual dignity. Another characteristic of the Renaissance period is the radical changes in ideas about religion, politics, and science. After the medieval period, philosophy developed into the modern period. The time span, the time frame, or the time span of modern philosophy reaches from about 1400 to 1900. So the time span was from 1400 to 1900 for the modern period of philosophy. The whole development includes three main phases. The whole development of modern period of philosophy had three main phases, three main stages for the modern period of philosophy to develop. The first phase is the Renaissance transition. The second phase is the classical modern methods and systematic explanation, of which the two most important are empiricism. Empiricism is a theory that all knowledge is derived from sense experience. And then the second one is rationalism. And rationalism is a theory that reason, rather than sense experience, is the foundation of certainty of knowledge. So this second phase of modern philosophy was dealing with empiricism, which is a school of thought in philosophy that focuses on establishing that knowledge can only be derived from sense experiences. What we can see, what we can touch, what we can feel, physical knowledge. And then the second school of thought is rationalism. And this school of thought establishes that reason, rather than sense experience, is the only foundation of certitude of knowledge. You see how the movement of philosophy is moving. Now humans are no more discussing about the origin of all things being the Greek gods. Humans are no more relating the origin of all things to the Christian God. Philosophy now is moving into arriving to the conclusion in the school of empiricism, in the modern period of philosophy, that sense experience is the basis for us to attain knowledge. And then another school of thought is saying, oh no, it cannot be sense experience. Rather, it is reason. And this reason they described, it is called rationalism. So we find this school of thoughts in this academic struggle of who reigns supreme. The third phase of this modern period of philosophy's development is the 19th century attempts of philosophical reconstruction. Now we find modern period of philosophy develop certain broad characteristics. So not only have we seen the modern period of philosophy developed into three phases, for it to actually develop fully as a period in philosophy, it had to pass through three phases. The Renaissance transition, which is the first phase, the classical modern periods, and systematic explanation, of which the two most important are empiricism and rationalism. So that classical modern period is when philosophers began to postulate that the foundation of all things can only be gotten from sense experience. And then another school of thought is postulating that the foundation of all things, the certitude of knowledge of all things, can only be gotten from reason. The last phase in this modern period of philosophy becomes the 19th century attempt at philosophical reconstruction, which is when philosophers began to reconstruct ideas, words, in order to arrive at the foundation of certitude of knowledge. Modern period of philosophy then has basic characteristics which we can identify it. We can know that this is the period, that this is the modern period that is different from the medieval period and is different from the ancient period of philosophy. So the characteristics of modern period, number one is, it grew within the context of modern cultural and national factors. Number one is that it grew within the context of modern cultural and national factors. Number two, modern period of philosophy used vernacular language and vocabulary in each linguistic area. There was room for philosophers to use their own native languages to express and explain their ideas. So philosophical language became that of a vernacular. It developed a technical philosophical vocabulary in each linguistic area that is embedded with vernacular languages. Number three, it was heavily influenced by the methods, concepts, and problems which evolved in the physical and biological sciences. So, modern period was influenced by the methods, by the concepts, and the problems which evolved in the physical and biological sciences. So now you find philosophy mingling with sciences, because you now see that one of the heavy characteristics of modern period of philosophy is that it is influenced by the methods of physical sciences and biological sciences, by the concepts of physical sciences and biological sciences, by the problems of physical sciences and biological sciences. So philosophy at this stage is no more discussing about the Greek poets of Homer and Hesiod. Philosophy is no more concerned about the basic substance of all things being the Christian God. Philosophy is now making a shift into sciences and being influenced by the methods of science. And this happened in the modern period of philosophy, which is the third period of the philosophical development. The fourth characteristics of philosophy is that it gradually disassociated itself from theology. Although religious interests continued to have a definite bearing on philosophical inquiries, but then philosophy gradually disassociated itself from theological framework. Remember, in the medieval period, philosophy and theology was one and same. Faith and reason played a huge role in the medieval period of philosophy. In the modern period of philosophy, one of the characteristics of this period is that philosophy began gradually to disassociate itself from theological framework, from theology, from relating itself to God. The fifth characteristic of this period is the growth of historical awareness led to its special interest in genetic questions and human historicity. The growth of historical awareness led to its special interest in genetic questions and human historicity. So you see, philosophy, because now it is disassociating, or rather then, because philosophy had begun to gradually disassociate itself from the theological framework, it is now led into questions of genetic and human historical concerns. So now you find philosophy getting involved into sciences. You find philosophy getting influenced by science. So the fifth characteristic of the modern period is that the growth of historical awareness is an awareness over time because it's historical, led to its special interest. So philosophy then began to have a special interest in genetic questions. Genetic questions are questions that are concerned, that are involved in biological sciences. And then human historicity. Human historicity. So you find philosophy being involved in science. The modern period of philosophy was met with the confrontation of science. Philosophy was no more about the cosmology, which is the universe or God. There was then a need for a systematic and mathematical reasoning, which has credence to the great philosopher René Descartes. In this modern period, there is philosophy and there is the unfolding world. of sciences. The unfolding world of sciences and philosophy began to reveal, began to show, began to be exposed, began to be known. This modern period of philosophy has great thinkers and philosophers such as Erasmus, Luther, Machiavelli, Montaigne, Francis Bacon, Thomas Hobbes, René Descartes, Baruch Spinoza, Leibniz, John Locke, George Berkeley, David Hume, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mills, etc. And it goes on and on and on and on. These are the philosophers that moved the hand of philosophy from mythology, from theology, into science. Now, friends, as the development of philosophy continued, philosophy then moved into the next stage of its development, which is the fourth stage. This fourth stage is called the contemporary period of philosophy. This period of the philosophic growth has a complete reshaping of the philosophic mind. It joins the conflict between empiricism and rationalism. You see, there has been this conflict. Remember empiricism? The theory that establishes the foundation for us to know the certitude of knowledge is what? Sense experience, sense perception. Rationalism, on the other hand, establishes the foundation, the certitude of us to have knowledge is by reason. In the contemporary period of philosophy, we see philosophy in this period joining in this conflict of empiricism and rationalism. What this means is that we find philosophers in these two schools of thought began to brainstorm, began to troubleshoot, began to think, began to reason, began to bring their minds together to argue for and against, which is the avenue through which we arrive at certitude of knowledge. Is it through the sense experiences? Is it through the senses? Or is it through reason? The scope of philosophizing has changed. It has now moved into knowledge. How do we know? Do we know from what we see, from sense experiences, from the senses, what we can see and touch? Or do we know from what we can think of, what we can reason of? Making it possible for people to utilize science and philosophy coherently. So, contemporary period of philosophy provided the avenue, created the room for philosophers to use science and philosophy coherently. Thinkers in this period include Charles Peirce, William James, John Dewey, Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, Henry Bergson, Alfred North Whitehead, Bertrand Russell, Rudolf Carnap, William van Orman Quine, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Gilbert Ryle, John Langshaw Austin, Richard Rorty, Soren Abe Kierkegaard, Edmund Husserl, Karl Jaspers, Gabriel Marcel, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and etc., etc., etc. Again, this period gave great attention to the study of human beings rather than myths, theology, or science. Philosophy as a systematic inquiry into the ultimate and fundamental cause of all things has branches. There are 4 basic branches of philosophy. 4. Number 1, metaphysics. Number 2, epistemology. Number 3, axiology. And number 4, logic. Metaphysics as a branch of philosophy is derived from 2 Greek words, meta, which means beyond, and physicon, which means physical. Therefore, metaphysics is the study of things beyond the physical. Literally, it is the study of reality beyond the scientific and mathematical realms. So the study of things beyond what you can see, what you can touch, what you can feel. The study of things that are supernatural in philosophy is metaphysics. So when you want to study about abstract things, abstract ideas, that study will take place in the branch of philosophy that is called metaphysics, because it's abstract, it is beyond the physical. The second branch of philosophy is epistemology. Epistemology is derived from the Greek word epistasteia. Epistasteia, which means know or know how to do. Epistasteia means know, to know, or know how to do. Epistemology is also derived from the Greek word episteme. And episteme means knowledge. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It addresses questions such as, what can I know? How is knowledge acquired? Can we be certain of anything? With epistemology, there are 2 categories. The first category is empiricism. The second one is rationalism. Now, we've talked about this empiricism and rationalism before now. Empiricism, the school of thought that concerns itself with the postulation that we can only arrive at a genuine knowledge through sense experiences. Rationalism, the school of thought that holds that we can only have knowledge through reason. It is in the branch of philosophy called epistemology that these schools of thought, this empiricism and rationalism, have their root. And that's why it says epistemology has two categories. There are so many other categories, but these are the two basic categories. The third branch of philosophy is axiology. Axiology is derived from the Greek word axios, which means worth or value. Worth or value. Axiology is the study of value. This value includes aesthetic value and moral value. Aesthetic value deals with beauty. It asks questions such as, what is beauty? While ethics deals with moral value. So in axiology, we find these two values. One is the aesthetic value, which deals with beauty. The other value is the moral value, which deals with human actions, human conduct, and that is ethics. So that is where ethics finds its roots. That is where ethics comes in. Ethics deals with moral values. Ethics concerns itself with questions such as what is right, what is wrong, what is the ideal, what is the actual. Ethics is derived from the Latin root word ethos, which means character. The fourth branch of philosophy is logic. Logic is derived from the Greek word logike or techne, which means art of reason. Art, A-R-T, art of reason. It also has its root word from the Greek word logos, which means word or reason. Logic is the study of correct reasoning. These branches of philosophy do not exist in isolation. There are many other areas of philosophy which deal with one or more of these branches. For example, philosophy of education, philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, political philosophy, philosophy of mathematics, and so on and so on and so on. So dear friends, this is what the word philosophy is, and how we can, in defining the word of philosophy, the concept of philosophy, the notion of philosophy, we will find the history behind that word and the different stages of the development of that word called philosophy. And thank you all so very much for this time. And I thank you for listening to me. And I wish you all the best. It is at this point that we'll come to the end of today's lecture. Take care of yourself and stay safe. My name is Dr. Kevin Omonale. Bye for now.